Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the line. Your name isn't on the visitor manifest. The voice was young, sharp, and marinated in the kind of self-importance that only comes from a new uniform and a sliver of authority. Officer Miller, barely 25, stood with his chest puffed out, one hand resting proprietorially on his duty belt. Before him stood an old man, perhaps 80 years old, leaning gently on a simple wooden cane. His clothes were clean but worn, a faded flannel shirt tucked into khaki trousers. His face was a road map of wrinkles, but his eyes were a pale, clear blue that seemed to see right through the young guard's bluster. The old man, Arthur Jennings, offered a patient smile. There might be a mistake, son. I was invited personally by General Davies. For the dedication ceremony, Miller scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. General Davies? The commandant. Right. And I'm the Secretary of Defense. Sir, the rules are simple. No name, no entry. The line is getting long. Please move aside so you don't hold up actual authorized personnel. He gestured dismissively towards a metal bench a few feet away. A clear social demotion from the formal queue leading to the entrance of the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Arthur's smile didn't falter, but a weariness touched its edges. I assure you, if you just check with the general's aide, I'm not checking with anyone. Miller snapped, his patience, thin to begin with, now completely gone. He saw an obstacle, a non-compliant civilian disrespecting his post. He didn't see a man. He saw a problem to be managed. You people always think the rules don't apply to you. You show up, no ID, no credentials, and expect to walk right in because you know someone well. Not on my watch, the small crowd in the line began to murmur. A few people looked annoyed at the delay, but others watched Miller's treatment of the old man with growing discomfort. Arthur sighed softly. He wasn't angry. He had seen boys like this before, young men mistaking rigidity for strength, arrogance for confidence. He had seen them in boot camp, seen them in the jungle, seen them everywhere in between. Son, there's no need for this tone. I'm just asking you to make a simple call. The quiet dignity in Arthur's voice seemed only to inflame Miller's ego. It felt like a challenge. The only call I'm making is to have you removed if you don't step aside. Now he took a step closer, invading the old man's personal space. His voice dropped to a low, menacing hiss. Don't make me put my hands on you, old-timer. The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. Arthur's grip tightened slightly on his cane, not in fear, but with a steadiness that was almost unnerving. His calm was a mirror, and in it, Miller's own agitation was reflected back at him, amplified. That won't be necessary, Arthur said, his voice as even as a placid lake. But he didn't move. He held his ground, not with aggression, but with a quiet refusal to be bullied. This passive resistance was more infuriating to Miller than any shouted retort could have been. It was a silent judgment. Last chance, Grandpa. Miller seethed, his face reddening. He reached out and grabbed Arthur's arm just above the elbow. The grip was rough, meant to intimidate, to force compliance through physical superiority. Let's go. Over to the bench. You can wait there until you remember where you belong. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. A woman in the line spoke up. Officer, he's just an old man. Take it easy, Miller shot her a venomous glare. Ma'am, I'm handling a security situation. Please mind your own business. He gave Arthur's arm a sharp tug. The old man stumbled slightly, his cane clattering against the polished concrete. It was a pathetic sound, the sound of manufactured frailty. Yet, as he righted himself, Arthur's eyes met Miller's, and for the first time, the clear blue held a flicker of something hard and ancient. It was a look Miller couldn't decipher, but it made the hairs on his neck stand up. He mistook the feeling for anger and tightened his grip. Don't you look at me like that, he warned. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The irony of the statement was lost on him. He saw only what was on the surface, a frail, stubborn senior citizen causing a scene. He couldn't see the architecture of the man beneath the weathered skin, the steel framework forged in crucibles he couldn't even imagine. He was a boy poking a sleeping dragon, utterly oblivious to the fire coiled within. The situation was escalating toward an ugly conclusion. Miller was committed, too proud to back down, and Arthur seemed resolved to stand his ground with quiet fortitude. The tension stretched thin, ready to snap. It was at that precise moment that a black government sedan, its fenders adorned with the small, 4-star flags of a full general, purred to a stop at the curb. The rear door opened, and out stepped General Marcus Davies, Commandant of the Marine Corps. He was a man who radiated authority without effort. Tall, immaculate in his dress blues, his chest a solid block of colorful ribbons, he moved with the unhurried confidence of a man accustomed to command. A young captain, his aide-de-camp, followed a respectful step behind. General Davies was heading towards the entrance when he noticed the disturbance at the security checkpoint. He saw the bottlenecked line, the agitated young guard, and the old man being held by the arm. His brow furrowed in annoyance. Public displays of disorder on his watch were unacceptable. Officer Miller saw the general approaching, and his demeanor shifted instantly. He released Arthur's arm, shoving him back a step, and snapped to a rigid posture of attention that was more caricature than salute. "General, sir," he barked, trying to project competence. "Just handling a minor security issue." This individual is not on the list and was refusing to comply with instructions. General Davies's gaze swept over Miller, a quick, dismissive appraisal that took in the flushed face and the overly aggressive stance. His eyes, a sharp, penetrating gray, then moved to the old man, and they stopped. He didn't see a frail civilian. He saw the posture. Even slumped in age, there was an unmistakable economy of motion, a stillness under pressure that was not the product of a civilian life. He saw the hands, gnarled with arthritis, but with long, capable fingers that rested on the head of the cane as if it were the grip of a rifle. His eyes narrowed, scanning the man from head to toe. Then he saw it. The sleeve of the old flannel shirt had ridden up slightly when Miller had grabbed him. On the weathered skin of the man's forearm, almost lost in a sea of freckles and faded scars, was a tattoo. It was old, the ink blurred and greened with age, but the image was still discernible to a man who knew what to look for. A skull, superimposed over a pair of crossed anchors, with the letters FR below it. Force Recon. But it was more than that. The general's gaze sharpened further, locking onto the old man's face. He saw past the wrinkles, past the white hair, to the bone structure beneath, to the set of the jaw, to the eyes, especially the eyes. A jolt of recognition, sharp and profound, shot through him. He felt as if he were looking not at a man, but at a page from a history book he had long thought closed. The general took a slow step forward, his aide and the now nervous officer Miller forgotten. The world seemed to shrink, focusing only on the two men, the old warrior and the new one. The commandant's mind raced, connecting the face, the tattoo, and the date of the ceremony, a dedication to the veterans of the Tet Offensive. It couldn't be. The official records listed him as killed in action, then amended to missing, presumed dead, after his team was overrun in the Ashau Valley. But the stories, the legends that were passed down in quiet reverence within the recon community, whispered of a lone survivor. A ghost. A man they called the Scythe. General Davies stopped directly in front of Arthur. He ignored Miller, who was beginning to sweat, realizing he was no longer the center of this drama. The general's expression was one of intense, almost reverent concentration. He was searching for absolute certainty. He needed to be sure. The whispers of the crowd died away into a heavy silence. Everyone could feel the monumental shift in the atmosphere. The power dynamic had been completely upended, though no one yet understood why. The general looked into Arthur's calm blue eyes, and in their depths, he saw the confirmation he sought. He saw the quiet fire that had never been extinguished. He drew himself up to his full height, his posture becoming even more rigid and formal than before. His voice, when he spoke, was not a conversational tone. It was a bark, a command that cracked through the air like a rifle shot, echoing with the authority of generations of Marine NCOs and officers. It was a phrase that hadn't been used in active service for over 50 years. It was a call sign and a challenge response from a unit that had officially never existed. Ghostwalker, prepare to Lima Lima. The words meant nothing to Officer Miller. They meant nothing to the civilians in the line. They meant nothing to the general's young aide. They were gibberish, a strange, nonsensical outburst. Miller almost smirked, thinking perhaps the old general was showing his age. But Arthur Jennings heard them, and in the space of a single heartbeat, 50 years of quiet civilian life evaporated like mist in a desert sun. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. It was not the slow straightening of an old man trying to stand tall. It was a neurological override, a deep, primal piece of training that bypassed age, arthritis, and the gentle stoop of time. Arthur's back snapped ramrod straight, his spine aligning with a precision that seemed impossible for his frame. His shoulders squared, pulling back with a suddenness that made the worn flannel of his shirt taut. His feet, clad in simple walking shoes, came together with an audible thump on the concrete, heels locked, toes at a perfect 45-degree angle. The wooden cane, a moment before a symbol of infirmity, was dropped. It clattered to the ground, forgotten. His left hand clenched into a tight fist at his side, thumb aligned perfectly with the seam of his trousers. His right hand, the one with the gnarled knuckles, shot up in a salute. It was not a gesture, it was a statement. The line from his shoulder to his elbow was perfectly parallel to the ground. His forearm angled upwards, his fingers held together as a single, rigid blade, the tip of his forefinger touching the outer edge of his right eyebrow. It was a salute of such breathtaking perfection, of such fierce and instantaneous precision, that it seemed to cut the air. It was a textbook salute, the kind of salute young Marines spend weeks trying to master on the drill fields of Paris Island, and few ever truly perfect. But the most profound change was in his face. The gentle, grandfatherly mask was gone. The mild blue eyes had hardened into chips of Arctic ice, focused, lethal, and completely aware. The lines on his face no longer looked like wrinkles of age, but like the harsh etchings of a life lived at the very edge of human endurance. He was no longer Arthur Jennings, the quiet retiree. He was a weapon, brought back online. His voice, when he answered the general's challenge, was a low, gravelly rasp, a voice that had given its last orders in a jungle half a world and half a century away. It was the correct, and only, response. Lima Lima is cold, sir. Awaiting the sweep, the crowd gasped collectively. A few of the older men in the line, veterans themselves, instinctively straightened their own posture, their eyes wide with disbelief and a sudden, overwhelming wave of respect. They didn't know the specific words, but they understood the language of the transformation they had just witnessed. They were in the presence of something extraordinary. Officer Miller stared, his mouth hanging open. His brain struggled to reconcile the image of the frail old man he had been manhandling with the soldier of granite who now stood before the commandant of the entire Marine Corps. The two realities were irreconcilable. He felt a cold dread begin to pool in his stomach. The world had just turned upside down, and he was standing right at the epicenter. General Davies held his own salute, his eyes locked with Arthur's. For a long, silent moment, the two men were connected across the decades. A four-star general and a long-lost legend, equals in the unspoken brotherhood of warriors. The respect flowing from the general was palpable, a current of energy that everyone present could feel. Finally, with a nod of profound deference, the general slowly lowered his hand. Arthur held his salute until the general's hand had dropped completely, then snapped his own arm down to his side with the same shocking precision. General Davies took another step forward and extended his hand, not for a handshake, but placing it gently on the old man's shoulder. "Sergeant Major Jennings," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Forgive me. I didn't recognize you at first. It is an honor, a profound honor." He then turned his head, his gaze falling upon the still frozen Officer Miller. The warmth in the general's eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial fury that was terrifying in its intensity. His voice dropped several degrees, becoming a low, dangerous weapon. "Officer," he began, the word dripping with contempt. "What is your name and rank?" Miller swallowed hard, his throat suddenly bone-dry. "Miller, sir. Corporal, Base Security, Corporal Miller," the general said, his voice lethally soft. "You have a choice. You can stand here and try to justify putting your hands on a living national treasure, or you can begin to pray that I am a forgiving man. I suggest you start with the latter." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet menace was more effective than any shout. The young captain, the general's aide, stepped forward, his own face a mask of controlled anger. He knew what was coming. He had seen the general dress down colonels with less intensity. For a mere corporal, this was going to be a career-ending event. The general gestured for his aide to retrieve Sergeant Major Jennings's cane, which the captain did with a reverence usually reserved for a holy relic. General Davies took the cane and handed it back to Arthur, who accepted it with a quiet nod. The brief, intense military bearing receded, and the quiet old man returned, though the shadow of the warrior now lingered in his eyes for all to see. With Arthur now standing beside him, the general turned his full, undivided attention back to Corporal Miller, who seemed to shrink inside his uniform. "Corporal," the general began, his voice now a tool of education, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "In the United States Marine Corps, we are taught to respect our history. We are taught to respect the giants on whose shoulders we stand. You are standing less than 50 feet from the entrance to a museum dedicated to that history, and you have just assaulted a piece of it." He pointed a single, steady finger at Arthur. "This is Sergeant Major Arthur Jennings. Do you know that name, Corporal?" Miller shook his head, looking utterly miserable. "No, sir, of course you don't," the general replied, his voice laced with disappointment. "You're too busy enforcing rules you barely understand to learn about the men who wrote them in blood." Sergeant Major Jennings was the senior enlisted man of 1st Force Reconnaissance Company during the Tet Offensive. His team, callsign Scythe, was inserted deep into enemy territory to confirm the location of an NVA divisional headquarters. They were compromised, surrounded, and outnumbered 100 to 1. The general's voice took on a storyteller's cadence, and the crowd leaned in, listening with rapt attention. For 3 days, they fought. They called in air support on their own position. When they ran out of ammunition, they used their knives. When their knives broke, they used their hands. Of the 6 men on that team, 5 were lost. The sole survivor was their team leader, the point man, the ghost walker. He paused, letting the weight of the story settle. Sergeant Major Jennings was wounded 17 times. He held his position alone for the final 6 hours until a rescue bird could attempt to get in. For his actions in that valley, he was awarded the Navy Cross, 3 silver stars, and he was recommended for the Medal of Honor. A medal he was awarded, posthumously, because we all thought he was dead. The crowd let out a collective, soft gasp. The words Medal of Honor hung in the air, imbued with a power and sanctity that silenced everyone. Corporal Miller's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. He looked as if he might be physically ill. He was staring at Arthur, not as an old man, but as a ghost, a legend from a campfire story made real. He had laid his hands on this man. He had called him grandpa and old-timer. The chasm of his own ignorance was now terrifyingly clear. General Davies wasn't finished. "This man," he continued, his voice rising slightly with controlled passion, "has sacrificed more for this country, for this corps, than you can possibly comprehend. He has endured horrors that would break a battalion of men like you. And his reward, upon returning to a place that should honor him as a king, is to be disrespected, manhandled, and humiliated by a child in a uniform who thinks authority comes from a badge and not from character." He took a step closer to Miller, his shadow falling over the young man. "You are a disgrace, Corporal, not just to the uniform you wear, but to the memory of every Marine who ever served. You have failed in the most fundamental duty of a Marine, to honor those who came before. You are relieved of your post, effective immediately. Captain," he said, turning to his aide, "take his name. I want him on report and reassigned to the mess hall on Paris Island for the next 6 months. I want him to spend every single day washing the dishes of the recruits who are trying to become half the man he just insulted. Is that clear?" "Crystal, sir," the captain replied, his pen already out. Miller could only stammer, "Sir, I didn't know that," the general stated, his voice dropping back to its Arctic chill. "Is the entire point. It is not your job to know. It is your job to treat every single person who approaches this gate with dignity and respect, because you never know when you are standing in the presence of greatness. Lesson learned, I hope." Without another glance at the ruined corporal, the general turned back to Arthur, his expression softening once more into one of profound respect. The transformation was startling, showing his anger was not a loss of control, but a tool he wielded with precision. He offered his arm to the sergeant major. "Arthur," he said, using his first name with a familiarity that was the highest form of respect, "please allow me to escort you. You are the guest of honor today. In fact, we are dedicating the new wing in your team's name." Arthur Jennings looked at the commandant's offered arm, then at the shattered young corporal being quietly led away by another guard. He saw the shocked faces in the crowd, now looking at him with awe and reverence. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He had not sought this. He had not wanted a scene. For 50 years, he had lived a quiet life, his past a private burden and a quiet pride. He had come today simply to remember his fallen brothers. He placed his hand on the general's arm. "Thank you, Marcus," he said softly, his voice once again that of a gentle old man. The two of them began to walk towards the museum entrance, the general shortening his stride to match the old warrior's pace. The crowd parted for them like the sea before Moses, their silence a testament to the powerful drama they had just witnessed. As they walked, the general leaned in slightly. "I have to admit, Sergeant Major, I read your after-action report a dozen times when I was at the academy. It's required reading at Quantico. I never dreamed I would meet the man who wrote it." Arthur chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Most of it was lies, General. You can't write down what it really feels like." "No," the general agreed quietly. "I suppose you can't." They passed through the tall glass doors, leaving the world of security checks and youthful arrogance behind. Inside, the hallowed halls of Marine Corps history awaited them, ready to welcome home one of its most revered and longest lost sons. The young captain, following them, watched the two men, one at the pinnacle of the modern Corps, the other a living embodiment of its most savage history, walk side by side. He thought of Corporal Miller, whose day, and likely career, was in ruins. It was a harsh punishment, but a necessary one. The captain understood the general's fury completely. It wasn't just about disrespect to an individual. It was about the potential loss of history, the danger of forgetting. Men like Arthur Jennings were libraries of unwritten knowledge and unspoken sacrifice. To dismiss them based on their appearance was to burn the books before they could be read. It was a sin against the Corps itself. Outside, the line began to move again, but the mood was forever changed. People spoke in hushed tones, recounting what they had seen. The story of the old man and the general would become a base legend, a cautionary tale passed from one generation of Marines to the next. It was a reminder that heroes do not always wear their greatness on the surface. Sometimes, it lies dormant, hidden beneath a worn flannel shirt and a quiet smile, waiting for the right words to call it forth once more.